In this presentation, we will discuss tax law and authority. When we put together the taxes, note that we are going to put together the taxes in accordance with a set of rules and regulations. And then, of course, the question is, what are those rules and regulations? Where do we go to find those rules and regulations? And what do we do when we have questions regarding those rules and regulations? We're going to break this down then to the statutory sources, the administrative sources, and the judicial sources. Now, note this is going to be more or less important depending on the types of tax preparation that you have. In other words, if we're focusing our tax preparation mainly on fairly basic returns rather than more complex returns, normally returns that are going to be more lower income level of the spectrum than the upper income level of the spectrum, the model that we would have, or if this was our return that we're focusing on that's fairly basic, the model that we would have is that we're going to have to do a lot of returns because the profit margin will be lower. It'll be a simple return, therefore we'll do more of them. Profit margin will be lower, but we'll do more returns, as opposed to higher income type of returns where we're going to be doing less returns, but there's a lot more complication with them. We got things that are going to be outside the mold. When we think about the law, then, we would think that most people that have a fairly straightforward return, if they just basically work as a W-2, they have the W-2 job, they're going to get the W-2, and everything should be documented in that format. And that means the data input should be fairly straightforward because it's a fairly straightforward type of situation. In that case, most of the information will be covered directly, basically, by the code. We can basically go straight to it and know exactly what we're supposed to do. Everything's laid out as it should be. As we go into more complex situations, however, we're going to have situations that don't fall in exactly to the code, possibly. We're going to have a lot of gray area. As things get more complicated, there's going to be areas where we're going to say, well, this isn't covered exactly by the code, the law. Then we're going to have to go to other sources and think about, well, how should we treat this situation? Now, on the lower income side of things, there's probably not a whole lot of research that's going to be going on because that's a higher level type of activity that would take place, and it would typically cost more to do a lot of research. And on a higher level, when you're doing more expensive type of returns with a lot more income, it makes a lot more sense to do a lot more of that research because it could have a big impact on the tax return, and therefore higher income individuals are going to be in a situation where they often have times must go beyond just basically the code and look into some more areas that are not as straightforward. So when we think about this, then we think about generally the law. So the tax code is created, it's the law. And then we think about, well, what if something doesn't quite fit? I don't know exactly what to do. It's not laid out in black and white terms in this situation within the law. Then we go to other sources such as the administrative sources and the judicial sources. So the statutory sources then are going to be things like the Internal Revenue Code itself. The Internal Revenue Code is the law, and it's also governed, of course, by the 16th Amendment of the Constitution, which allows the federal government to have the power of taxation. So we think, okay, there's the Internal Revenue Code, that's the law. What if we go, just like if there's a criminal case, what if we go to the actual law and our situation doesn't fit completely right within the law? We're saying, well, this isn't exactly the same. I don't know exactly what to do here because the law doesn't lay out exactly what to do in this type of situation. Now, if you're talking about something like a W-2 employee and someone did work, they're an employee, there's just no question about it. The employer has issued the W-2, everything is straightforward. You're not talking about, there's typically no problem there. But if you're talking about some other types of situations and you're questioning whether this is income or not, some type of investment income or other types of income, then you're going to say, well, maybe this isn't covered directly in the Internal Revenue Code. And then you have to say, okay, well, where am I going to go to get guidance in that point? One place, the administrative sources, that would include Treasury regulations, revenue rulings, revenue procedures, private letter rulings, and the IRS notices. These are resources, and oftentimes there will be issues, and the IRS, the regulatory agencies, will be aware of them, and they will give guidance on this information. And so then the next step is to look at the guidance for those resources and try to see if that will help to solve the problem. So obviously the top line is the code itself. If the code is covering it, then you just go by the code. If you need more assistance in a situation that is not directly covered, then you would go down the line and look at things like the administrative sources. Then you can take a look at judicial sources. You might say, well, I still don't see the guidance in this actual situation. Is there a situation where people actually have judicial sources, such as a tax court, U.S. District Court, U.S. Court of Federal Claims? When would that happen? Well, it happens all the time, actually, where people might say, we didn't know what to do under the code, and there wasn't enough guidance for us to know what to do here. Therefore, we basically appealed a position. The IRS, said that you owed tax, and they went to basically to court on it to argue about whether or not that was the case. Then you can take a look at those judicial resources as another source of guidance. So note again, you want to go by the code itself because that's going to be the top source. If it's black and white in the law, it is what it is. Regulations, and then if those resources aren't sufficient to give you the guidance, then you can go to the court cases, which are basically laying down the precedent that would happen in the past. You would think that it would be logical to think that if it's not something covered directly in the code, there's no clear guidance on it, and there was a previous court case that's basically similar to or the same as the situation that you are in, that you can use that as guidance then in that type of situation.